The Talk Station presents Faith Matters, a look at contemporary stories and issues from a faith perspective. While this is a pre-recorded show, we are interested in your ideas, comments, and questions, and we urge you to email them to faithmatters@thetalkstation.com.
Give me faith, trust what you say, that you're good and your love is great. I'm broken inside, I give you my life.
And now, your host for Faith Matters, Ben Ball.
And welcome to the program here on this Easter Sunday morning here on the Faith Matters on the Talk Station. And I want to welcome again our trio today, Reverend Mark Woods, Reverend Robert Cornegie, and Dr. Ron Monteperto. And good day, gentlemen. Hope everyone is well on this Holy Week.
Very well. Thank you.
Very well. Thank you, Ben.
Recording this on Thursday of Holy Week now. But in this week, there is with heavy hearts and discussing some of the news events of the week and of the past of recent times anyway. And we had the shooting at the Jewish Community Center and the retirement home that took place in Overland Park, Kansas. And in that shooting, a man has been arrested, and his connections now well known to the KKK. But I think what I'd like to bring up about this is not the event itself, but the reaction to this from the woman who was the daughter of the one. It was a grandfather and grandson that went to the talent show at this Jewish Community Center, and they were shot by the suspect, or allegedly shot by the suspect. And in this, they have a press conference from CNN that has been on YouTube and been around and shared in a lot of different ways now. And it is by Mindy Corporan, even though I think that is her maiden name, but that's how she's known on the internet right now. But Mindy Corporan, who talks about coming upon the scene as she came upon the scene before the ambulances even got there. And so I wanted to play that for you. It's about a little bit over 2 minutes, and because it's remarkable in the things that she shares.
When I pulled into the parking lot, I saw that my dad's truck was there and that the car doors were open, and I wondered why my dad wasn't just standing there. And as I pulled up, I saw that he was lying on the ground. And my first thought was that he'd had a heart attack. He was just lying there. But very quickly I realized that it wasn't that, and I knew that my dad was in heaven within seconds. And I ran around the truck and I saw my son lying there, and there were already two people with him. There were two men whom I don't know, and they were holding him, and I did not get a good look at him. I saw just that he seemed a little lifeless, but I did not get a significant look at him before someone named Mickey, who I'm very blessed for him, grabbed me and held me very tightly and pulled me away from the scene. And as I went into the Jewish Community Center, I saw bullet holes in the glass, and then it started to dawn on me what had happened. And I want to thank the Jewish Community Center. It was very unreal, and no one should have to go through that. But they, they were careful in locking down the location. It was a crime scene, and it didn't feel like a crime scene to me. It was my family. I had two family members that were lying on the ground. So I felt a lot of comfort. I felt God immediately. I prayed that Reet would survive. I prayed and prayed and prayed that he would survive. But I've later found out why he didn't. I know that they both died from head trauma. And I feel confident from what I heard that they didn't feel anything. They didn't know what was coming. They were ambushed. So it's going to be really hard. And I wanted to tell people that last night at the vigil. This isn't easy. People keep saying, how come you're so strong? And I'm strong because I have family. I'm strong because I have faith. I know that God did not do this. I know that there are evil actions. But what we do have is each other, and we have love, and we have prayer, and we have friends and family. Our phone's ringing off the hook. People from high school and college and people around the United States, and all of you here want to hear what we want to say. It was a horrible act of violence, and our dad, and my son were at the wrong place at the wrong time for a split second.
And that is, again, Mindy Corporan speaking, and that was recorded by CNN and then up on their CNN YouTube page. And, gentlemen, as you hear that, I just find it, as I often am struck by the remarkable resilience of people with faith after a tragedy like that. But hers is incredible to me, Robert.
Yeah, the first time I heard her speak, I really, I kind of, switched into it on TV, and they had her interviewing her, and she was speaking, and so I didn't know who she was, and it just didn't connect as she started talking, her demeanor with what had just happened, and she was able to present herself so clearly and so calmly, and so faithfully. And actually, she inspired my message for sunrise service, which is, are you living death-free? And she, I think, personifies that, living that kind of a life, that life of faith, where we know that life on this side is just the beginning of life for us. It's not the sum total. It's just the beginning of it. It's the stepping off point. And boy, she has personified that so powerfully for this nation during this week, which I think is again very significant.
Any other reaction there, Robert? Ron, how about you?
I was, for a variety of technical reasons, this is the first time I've heard this. I don't know what to say. I think if we took all the scripture that ever was, and if it didn't exist, and all the theology, and it didn't exist, and we were to ask the question of how should a person live, and just heard that woman's voice, that would be alive. That would be the whole message. It would be just living and real and vivid, and that's why I find it so incredibly profound.
It is, and let me just get a reaction for you, Mark.
Yeah, when I first heard it, you had sent it to us, Ben, and so I clicked on it and heard it, and I think that, and she even addressed this question, that people were saying, how are you okay? How can you get up and talk about these things? And she addressed it was because of her faith. And that's quite profound that she would do that. I do worry about her being hounded because of that. Her being sort of pressed upon in that way. But I still think it is a great testament to, particularly the week that we're in. We're in Holy Week,
right?
We're focusing upon death. We're focusing upon what Christ has done on Good Friday. We have services, and then we'll move to Sunday, which is Easter Sunday. And so I think in her comments, too, she spoke about both death, which I thought she portrayed very vividly, actually, describing what she saw, limp, lifeless. She uses this language, and then she ties it also with the language that Robert was talking about of we are still in life, and I want you to live life. Perhaps that's pretty decent theology about the incarnation, and how it is both death and life, and how sometimes we have to hold those things together. And I think the perfect time that we do that is Holy Week and Easter.
If you go back and if you actually go and look at what she also said during the vigil, which she refers to that, which was held the night before this particular little press conference was held, she speaks at a church where the community is holding a vigil, and it's a Christian church. They're holding this vigil, and they don't know her when she gets up, and she identifies herself, and the person who's taking the camera phone video, there's just an audible gasp when she identifies herself as the daughter of the person who was killed and the mother of the other one that was killed, and then she goes on to speak, and she also talks about life, is that that life for all of us continues. It's how we choose now to live that. And it's just, to me, it's just a remarkable message. And I'm struck by that. I think about times, for example, the Oklahoma City bombing, and how some of the parents of victims from the child care center, when they lost kids there, were putting flowers up on the fence and offering forgiveness. Those areas of faith are just somehow foreign to me sometimes. I think that strong of faith. And I think that's just remarkable. It's such a great witness to us all.
I think that is a very honest comment. That I say this sometimes to my people. When I will use an illustration like that, I will say, I hope that I will have that kind of faith if I am ever faced with those kinds of things. And I think that's part of why we talk about the resurrection, why we talk about the death of Christ, that perhaps we will have that. And she says that. She says, we will have life, and we are going to have more life. I mean, there is such a kind of movement towards hope and life in that.
And even in that vigil, she talks about her 12-year-old son, how much life he packed into 12 years. And we would think, well, it's just getting started. How can that? And we would think, how can that be fair? Well, she answers that question too. She says, God did not do this. That there is evil in the world.
Yeah, we can get so focused on this life. Look, we can be swept away by it and believe that, everything is the here and now. And it's times like these, and this is why this is so exceptional, the what she expressed at this particular time for us all to hear.
And again, we'll have more on this Easter morning here on Coastal, I keep saying that, here on Faith Matters on the talk station, FM 107 and AM 1240. Welcome back to Faith Matters here on this Easter morning on the talk station, FM 107 and AM 1240, and with the Reverend Robert Cornegie, Reverend Mark Woods, and Dr. Ron Monteperto, and we're talking about matters of faith during this Holy Week, and of course the reaction to the testimony that we just heard from Mindy Corcoran about having her own father and her son basically die before her after that shooting at the Jewish Community Center. And Mark, you had said you were reading where some of the responses to this in that community, and again, some really remarkable things that were going on.
I read on Time.com. It was the title of the response was Overland Park shooting: a church responds to hate, and it's put out by St. Thomas, two Episcopal priests at St. Thomas the Apostle, which is just a mile down the road from the Jewish Community Center. And they kind of weave this narrative and talk about the relationship that St. Thomas the Apostle, the church, has with the Jewish Community Center before they came there. They would use their building. They would, I think the rabbi there came and did a Seder for them at the the
before
church.
The community center was built.
Before the community center was built, I believe they were helping them to do this. And it's really interesting, and they remind us that not only are we in Holy Week, but Passover begins at this time as well. And so you have these kind of two brothers, if you will, that experience a kind of violence and yet come together. When usually, or traditionally, sometimes Christians have sort of had an uneasy relationship with Good Friday particularly, and Jewish communities, because some of the interpretations of Scripture, as if like the Jews were the one who killed Jesus or something like this, and they kind of speak against that, saying that, our very practice together in a vigil, our very practice together is more of a kind of, what's the word I'm looking for, a sort of tapestry that they weave together, both the Jewish faith and the Christian faith, in a way that can respond to this thing. It's a very good article in Time on Time.com.
Robert, you said your church held a Seder this week.
Yeah, we did, and I've been blessed to be involved in several different Seders. My first one was a Jewish Seder by a rabbi, a Reform rabbi in Greenville, as a matter of fact, and we went up and years ago, and it was very, very Jewish, didn't have the Christian element to it. And then we've been to several with Messianic Jews and with others, and then we've done it several times at our church. And so last night was our time. We had about 40 people there and had our Passover meal as well as the ceremony, and it was just reminding me as we went as I was thinking about her, the mother and the daughter, and her response to this, and how in the Seder order you have parsley that you dip in salt water.
Right.
That is, salt water is to symbolize the tears. And it talks about the parsley is the springtime event. It's life, it's love, it's good, it's the goodness of God, and then the salt water of the tears. And you dip those two in, demonstrating the duality of life. And that's the way it is here on this planet. Life is like that. It is mixed. And but it was so impressive of how she responded in that circumstance, to the depth of her faith in that.
Well, and Ron, I think one of the profound things again about her understanding was that it was an unblinking kind of unquestioning understanding of death following life. That, as she says, I knew that he was in heaven, and I knew that in an instant. And there was no shake from that, no rattling, she didn't have to feel like, I hope that he's in heaven. It was a clear knowledge. And I think that was remarkable.
I think that living in hope, as we say, means really living in the clear knowledge. I mean, when we say we live in hope, we don't mean I hope it's going to turn out, or if I do all the right things, I hope it'll be all right, or I hope God will be pleased by this. I mean, we said one level we say that. But to live in hope, which we do since Jesus and since the resurrection, is to live in the certain knowledge. Because God has told us, and God would not tell us that if it's not true. And so she lives in hope. And what strikes me is the utter certainty that comes across in her voice. The utter certainty, which to me reflects what my own version of, I think of as, what we all think of as faith. It's faith not as a matter of believing something even though you don't have any proof for it. Faith is just a way of life, is a way of being. And it just came out of her, and that's why I think it's such a powerful, powerful thing.
We during this Holy Week again, especially, we take on sometimes the ideas of what you're just expressing about hope and where death is defeated. We talk about sin being defeated, but it was clear that she lived that without having to have it re-explained to her. In other words, her testimony on that was just as sure as she could recite the alphabet. Right. Mark, any thoughts?
I find it fascinating too that it's so fitting that we talk about this during Holy Week, because it seems to me that Christ's incarnation, life, death, and ultimately resurrection is a response on some level to human violence and human sin. As if, when we come to Good Friday, we will repent of our sins. We will realize that it is the violence in the world that has sort of created this aspect. And the way we do it at our church is we do a Tenebrae service, and at the end of the service, everything is dark, and all of the symbols are sort of draped with stuff. And then on Easter, we lighten everything else, and we reveal everything in a certain way. And perhaps at the very moment that we respond with violence, God responds with love and with resurrection and with life. And I think that sort of plays itself out very well in Holy Week.
She even speaks in the vigil. She speaks about how some people do grieve differently, and she grieves in her testimony. I mean, that was how she could best handle what was just an untenable situation.
Yeah, isn't it remarkable that when we do that, that's why we all are sort of shocked and the gasps that come out when we hear this kind of a testimony, because it is rare. Mm-hmm. It is rare, sadly, to find this, that, her faith is not often we're accused, like many other faiths, that we are just blind in our faith and we don't have any evidence, and we just go about this, and that's hardly it. I mean, the resurrection this week is all about evidence,
right?
And it's come and see, and the tomb is empty. There's some real evidence here. You can go to all the other tombs and there's somebody in there, but this one's empty, and so we have pretty good evidence on this. So. It's a powerful testimony to the witness of how we react in these circumstances, and having gone through this some in hospitals with deathbed reactions, and when true believers truly understand what's going on, and they're in their last moments, and that moment that they have, and the faith that they demonstrate through that process is so important for us to see. It is an evidence. It's not just a blind hope. Mm-hmm. It's an evidence. It's that blessed assurance, Jesus is mine. And wow, what an evidence, powerful evidence that is for those who struggle with these things to see.
We have talked in the recent weeks about some celebrity pastors and about some mega churches, but we don't talk about the people in them. We hope that they are sincere in their faith and what they are trying to follow, etc. But and she in fact is a member of one. Her and her family attend Resurrection Church, which is Adam Hamilton's church, and he is very very popular pastor. And has put out a lot of his own teaching videos, etc. So he's embraced a lot of media. But I probably can go and find it later. But his own sermon this Sunday will probably be quite interesting, I would imagine. Mm-hmm. But how will it affect all of us? How will it affect our worship to have something like this, and then also to be able to witness this sort of, or be witness to her witness? How will it affect how we worship on this Sunday? Again, we're recording this earlier in the week, so yeah. I think it will have a great effect on my own experience.
Yeah,
worship.
I think it will as well. I would not be surprised. I guess we're recording on Thursday, so I probably should already have my sermon done. But I have no doubt that this would be a good way to kind of illustrate life and death, and particularly resurrection, and why we need a kind of resurrection. So, yeah, I think that would be very helpful on Sunday morning.
Ron?
I'd go even farther. I think much is said about signs and wonders. And I have to think that this is one of those signs that God is sending us to remind us of what truth is. I'm reminded of 10 years ago, I moved here under conditions of great stress and strain. And I remember Good Friday, and Pope John Paul II.
Well, we got about 10 seconds here. You want to pick this up on the other side of the break here.
Okay, sorry.
On Faith Matters here on the Talk Station, FM 107 and AM 1240. Welcome back to Faith Matters here on the Talk Station, FM 107 and AM 1240, and I'm Ben Ball, along with Dr. Ron Monteperda, Reverend Mark Woods, and Reverend Robert Carnegie, and we're talking about matters of faith in this Holy Week. And Ron, you were about, as we went to the hard break, as they say in media, you were about to tell us about Passover, I think it was, or Good Friday, 10 years ago.
Good Friday, 10 years ago, we had just moved here in a period of great personal difficulty. And I can remember sitting in church on Good Friday, and at the same time, then Pope John Paul II was very ill and was in the process of passing. I believe he died a couple of days after Easter. And here is this, there's much talk of suffering and pain and everything else. And it made such an impression upon me. And I have a similar reaction to this testimony that we have just heard, by the utter convictedness of the people who are involved, the total absence of doubt, the total trust. And I really do think that we are intended to take that message from that. I'm not saying that, God didn't kill these people. That's not what I'm saying. But it happened. And good always triumphs over evil. Always.
So what are we to take from this? In other words, how is God going to use this in our lives, right?
Yeah, I think that's one way to look. I hope it doesn't sound too naive. Mm-hmm. But God always triumphs. And that may be controversial in some ways, but mm-hmm. That's what I believe.
Well, no, I think you're absolutely right. And it is fascinating to think about that he went there, the person that we assume
mm-hmm.
did this, after Jewish. His intention was to kill Jewish people.
Right. He runs into yelling Heil Hitler.
Yeah. And he killed 3 Christians. And so it's going to be fascinating to see how that works out within that community, of the Jewish community, in this process, as they ponder and think, because they think through these things, mm-hmm. and they will think through this. So it's just significant, I believe, the levels of this as this thing, kind of
right.
runs through the community is going to be fascinating, and they were prepared.
Yeah, they were.
They were prepared,
yeah.
And so it's going to be interesting to watch this as it progresses.
Also during this Holy Week, we talk about Jesus becoming sin, on the cross, and taking that with him, victory over sin. Do we talk? Is it the right time to be speaking of this particular person and then the hate that drove him, and apparently drove him, the alleged shooter there, to say that correctly? I mean, that drove him for much of his life. I mean, he was kicked out of the I think it was in the Army. Kicked out of the Army in 1972 for passing out racist literature. He was part of a Klan organization in the Carolinas. Had even appeared locally here at rallies. Moved up to Missouri at a different time and continuing similar activities. He ran. Mm-hmm. He tried to run for governor in North Carolina as a Democrat, then tried to run for senator or another statewide office as a Republican, mm-hmm. In a primary, and he ran in Missouri, mm-hmm. as well, just so he could get the free air time, so his speech wouldn't be censored from that. And so we see this difficulty and the challenge, I think, that we have as Americans with the free speech that we have, but also the heavy hearts that we feel now because of how this hate eventually manifested itself. Mm-hmm. And Mark, let me turn to you. This I think is the appropriate week to discuss all of these things.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think over the next few days or weeks, there'll be lots of talk about this person, and we'll try to understand. You talked about this kind of hate. I don't think that we should ever be able to understand this kind of hate. I think that this kind of violence, this kind of hatred should always be to us sort of irrational, sort of not... Yeah, a mystery on some level, that it does not, it should never make sense to us of why these things can happen. What should probably during Holy Week make begin to make sense for us is how out of this kind of violence, we as Christians and as Jews begin to pull out of it. I don't know if that's the right word I'm looking for, but rather to sort of kind of what Ron was saying, reflect upon this. What does this mean for us in our faith? I think Robert's comment about that he went to kill Jews and killed Christians, one of the things that we might be able to pull out of that is perhaps our clearly defined lines between Jewish and Christian are not so clearly defined. Perhaps there is more work to be done there, that we are sort of brothers or ecumenical rather than other religions. I think that might be something to pull from that we are more together than we are apart, particularly Jews and Christians, I think.
Ron?
Well, I think what I take from this testimony and relating it to Jesus on the cross, I keep returning to the theme of certain knowledge, which we sometimes talk about in terms of living in hope. She lived in certain knowledge. Jesus lived in certain knowledge. Jesus was a man. He was us. But he lived in that certain knowledge. She lives in, I'm not making an equation here,
Right.
but in principle, it's very similar. I hear a certain knowledge in her. She's redeemed.
Right.
See, and I think that has some aspect of redemption. Her life it's very different. And it's different, I believe, obviously, because of Jesus and the things that he did.
Mm-hmm.
So, for what that's worth.
Well, Robert, I mean, we talk in apologetics, you especially, you talk about the use of reason and evidence and a lot of things. And I would guess as a result of that, you would hope that people would come to that kind of certainty that this Mindy Corcoran expressed.
Yeah, but, we don't get to that kind of, I mean, the evidences and all of that reinforce that kind of a faith, but the kind of faith she's talking about is a gift from God.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
It's a gift. We don't reason ourselves into these places. Now, we can, in that faith, then it gives us a worldview from which we can look at life. And she obviously, in this circumstance, has a biblical worldview. She sees beyond the veil of death. I mean, it doesn't stop there. Life continues on. And so that's an important thing. A fascinating thing, just from the Seder last night, in the second cup, when you're doing the second cup, which is the cup of deliverance, you start with a full cup, and there's joy in the full cup. And then one by one, you dip your finger in and take out a drop of the wine or the juice and put it on the plate. And for the plagues, and you actually pray a prayer for the Egyptians who died in the process of God setting his people free, which is a powerful process to go through for the Jewish people, that in their deliverance there was an awareness of the presence of death. In freedom there's also loss, and it's just a powerful reminder. And so for this poor, tormented, obsessive man who did this horrible act, there are to be prayers for him.
And prayer for those who are caught up in that hate. Exactly.
So it's not just one side, it's both. And that our faith reaction has to be that big. God calls us to push down those boundaries and pray that big. That's a big prayer.
Mark, I don't think there would be anyone who would question if Mindy Corcoran, again, who was the daughter of the man who got shot, and the mother of the boy that got shot there at Overland Park, Kansas. Anyone would blame her for being angry at God, except for her. She would blame her. So for that.
Yeah, no one would blame her, because I think the psalmist is one who is often, you get a language of anger from the psalmist.
Followed by
kind of praise or an affirmation of who God is. And I imagine, her grief will take many forms over the next few years, and it will be up to. She's at Adam Hamilton's church. It'll be up to that community sort of to rally around her. And even if anger does eventually come, that might be a response that on some level would be appropriate, but it's always kind of tempered.
Mm-hmm.
It's always kind of tempered by what we know as Christians. You know what I mean? And even that sometimes can be infuriating, I guess. But, I think you're right, Ben. I think for her, anger in this situation would not be the right response. It would not, for her, that is not the right response right now. Because you had so much anger seemingly on the other side, if you will.
Right.
And that's going to wrap it up for this segment here on Faith Matters. One more to go, as we hope that you will stay with us here on the program. Welcome back to Faith Matters, here for our final segment for this Easter Sunday morning. And we're recording this during Holy Week, and we're glad that you could join us as well. I'm Ben Ball, along with Dr. Ron Monteperdo, Reverend Mark Woods, and Reverend Mark Cornegie. Robert Cornegie, he knows who he is, even if I know. And we were talking about the incredible testimony by Mindy Corcoran, who was the daughter of the man and the mother of the young boy that got shot in Overland Park, Kansas Jewish Community Center, as part of the rampage that took place just recently, and that has certainly been captured in the headlines there too. And Mark, let me just come to you first. You kind of helped us finish that last segment, but you were talking about how this is can and should be a challenge, not only to those who witness that as lay people, but those of us as pastors.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we talked a little bit in the break, and Robert had mentioned that he found this challenging as well. As pastors, how to respond when we have these acts of violence, when we are encountered by whether it's natural disasters or it's some form of human violence and violent acts, how we should respond. And we got to talking about how Miss Corcoran, is that how you say her last name?
I think
Corcoran?
So. Yes.
How she responded conditioned in some level our response. And I find it fascinating too that the reason she could do that and lead in that way was because she was so close to it. It wasn't somebody removed talking about this. She was talking about her father, right?
Her father and
her father
son.
And her son. And so for the rest of us...
She encounters them in the parking lot.
She encounters them in the parking lot. For the rest of us, that's as close as you can get. And so her response conditions our response. If she acts like she is angry and all this, that gives us permission, because she is so close to the victims, to then act in that way. But instead, she acted this way, and she really became a kind of leader for even the nation. And how do we respond to the Overland Park shootings? And,
yeah, really good point.
And even when you said in the beginning, Ben, how the people that were at the vigil gasped when they heard it was her up there, as if her grieving, her response is kind of the response that we should have.
The watchword for us all.
It is. I think that's a good way to put it.
And again, the scene, without any preparation, she comes upon the scene. There's nobody telling her that this has happened to her loved ones ahead of time.
That's right.
She's there at the scene before the ambulances. Just moments later, she explains actually in the vigil, she had been off with another child at a soccer, I think it was, and so she was making the rounds like moms do, doing the mom taxi, and running around to the different things. And the grandfather was with the 12-year-old at this talent show. So it was just a normal course of her life that this was happening, and there was no preparation. There was nobody who was sick ahead of time. There was no warning, no visit to the morgue to identify. This was happened in real time to her, and the response that we get is her response as it unfolded.
Mm-hmm. Remarkable it is, and how the ministry of the Spirit for her at that time. As Christians, we believe that we are indwelled by the Holy Spirit, and the Spirit helps us in these moments when we are things are happening completely outside of our expectations, and how God, the Holy Spirit, brings us to a place and walks with us and provides support in that. It's remarkable as she talks about the men that were ministering to her son, and the one that came and ministered to her
and just hugged her,
and that process, and how she immediately, it appears, turned to God in that process. There is a choice we can make in these times, and she made the choice to turn to God. Powerful.
Look at the 3 blessings that she mentions in that minute and a half there. She says that she instantly knew that her father was in heaven.
Right.
That the 2 guys that she didn't know, and she still didn't know the next day or whenever these days were occurring, who was holding her son, and she only knew the first name of the guy that came and hugged her and held her, and she publicly thanked them as all being blessings in her life.
Right.
It's remarkable.
Yeah. I often think this as a pastor, that church and all of the things that we do in church, and that we do them over and over and over again, we shake hands, we sing, we talk, is all a kind of practice, a kind of training us to react to one another in certain ways, the passing of the peace, so that when we come into a moment where we don't know what to do, we have been trained to react in a certain way. I would love to think that, at Cherry Point United Methodist Church, that's what we do. But I think churches all over the world, we practice and we practice and we practice eating together and singing together, sticking out our hands and saying grace and peace to you, or peace be with you, or how are you doing this morning? So that when we come to these moments, we can have the reaction the way Mindy had the reaction, and the way Robert, I think, is talking about her.
Right.
That church becomes to train us to do that.
Right.
To react.
Ron?
The only thing I would, yes, to all that Mark has just said, would you accept the substitution of the word formation for training? We need to be formed.
Sure.
And it's not so much a question of training sort of implies rote. You do that, but formed gets to character, it gets to personness, it gets to personhood. This woman is formed. She is a model of Christian formation, as I understand that term, and as such, she is a grace to all of us. One last thing I can't resist, as the only non-pastor around this table. Easter's got to be the hardest time for all pastors. I don't know how anybody preaches the resurrection, how you preach the resurrection. But I somehow think that you've all, this time around, all pastors have been given something more to work with. And I'm looking forward to this Easter particularly, to what has happened.
Paul was real clear about it in Ephesians, that the pastors are to form, to equip, to train the members, the saints, as it's put, for the ministry, the work of the ministry. And this is the work of the ministry, isn't it? This is that time when we show the different kingdom, that there's another kingdom here, and the two are together. And how do we exemplify that? And wow, thank you, Lord, for this example. And it has affected my message on. And
I think a lot of people, there were probably a lot of folks who will talk about her bearing this cross in an Easter sense too. However, I'm not sure she would. I think she plainly puts that as Christ bore that cross, so I didn't have to. And because that would be that would be a normal, I think, reaction for a lot of people. A lot of us as faithful Christians would think about this as what a terrible weight on her shoulders, but she didn't seem to have that effect.
Yeah, no, she transferred that.
Right. And that's a lesson for us all, I think, Mark, to talk about.
Yeah, and we would do well to remember, particularly on Easter Sunday. Why do we come into church and we tell this and we read from Matthew 28 or John 20 every single Easter? Mm-hmm. Perhaps we do it so that we will be trained to act that way, so that one day we can really say, I believe in the resurrection of Jesus Christ. Yeah. And then it doesn't just become some kind of ethical training, but Christ really is in us, as Paul says in Romans 6, which is the Easter Vigil lectionary passage, where Christ is in us so much so that we react that way, not because we choose to react that way, but it is because that is who we are. We are a people who react in love when we are confronted with violence and sin, and we realize that the death and resurrection of Christ has completely overcome the tyranny of violence and sin.
And we live beyond the evil. We don't let that be our standard bearer of life on this earth, is the evil that surrounds us again. Again, I think as we talk about this, I encourage folks to go if they have not seen it. A lot of people I know listen to different segments and they may not hear that we played it at the beginning, but go on the on YouTube and look for Mindy Corcoran and look at this, both at the vigil and also this CNN press conference that's on their CNN YouTube site, and go look at that. I think it's just remarkable. I probably watched it a dozen times now, and I think it's just remarkable every time to look at how are we formed. And so on this Easter, say hallelujah. And Christ the Lord is risen.
He is risen indeed.
And we'll see you next week on Faith Matters.
Thank you for joining us for Faith Matters. Email your comments, questions, and suggestions to faithmatters@thetalkstation.com.
Give me faith, trust what you say, that you're good and your love is great. I'm broken inside, I give you my life. Give me faith.
Faith Matters is a production of The Talk Station.